Hello, everyone. Hello. Oh, look at all these people coming in. I'm Canadian, also from Ontario. I see the person from Alberta, Germany, UK, Ireland, California, people from all over the world. I love it. Thank you so much for joining me and for taking this time for you. This is going to be an hour of, you're not going to feel like it's self-care, but it really is. So thank you for joining. Thank you, Stephanie, for putting on this whole week just for us, and also for inviting me to come, or giving me the opportunity, since I sort of invited myself. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. So I would love to know, how many of you are totally new to me? I'm guessing that many of you are. My name is Sheri Johnson. I am the founder of the Women of Worth group program and the Awakening Worth podcast. So some of you might have come across that before. I'm a life coach, a spiritual coach, and I help childless women to let go of grief and triggers so that they can create a beautiful, purposeful life, even without kids. Now, I would encourage you to get your typing fingers ready, because I'm not going to just sit here and talk at you for an hour. I really want to know how what I'm about to say and teach you is landing. It might be a little bit different than what you're used to hearing. And some of you might even resist what I'm about to share with you. And if you find yourself in that scenario, simply listen with curiosity. Ask yourself, what's getting to me about this? Why am I resisting? And I think, as Steph and I were just talking about this, take what feels good to you and leave the rest. So a little bit about me before I dive into the 5 keys to responding to the insensitive remarks. You might be wondering how I landed on this path, because I'm also on the childless path. And so I'll give you a little bit of background. I was single until my mid-30s. I finally got married at 40. I had 3 miscarriages over 3 years, and then 2 years of IUI fertility treatments. And that's when everything kind of came to a standstill. I was 45 when we finally started to explore IVF, and we were told that it likely wouldn't work without a donor egg. So my husband and I made the difficult decision to not move forward with that. And I struggled with that decision. I felt like maybe we didn't try hard enough. I felt that I might be judged for not doing that. I felt like maybe I don't even belong with the women who did go through IVF, and because I didn't. And of course, I had trouble already fitting in with my mom friends. I was triggered a lot. And there came a pivotal moment once when I realized something that was really at the heart of my struggles. And the big realization was that it wasn't just grief. When I figured this out, what I was able to do was sort of separate out some of these feelings. So what I was feeling besides grief was not belonging, envy, anger, resentment, and one that you've probably heard before, unworthiness. And when I started to focus on working through some of these other emotions, not just grief, but all of the other emotions, that's when things started to turn around for me. So I'm going to share with you today one little piece of what turned into a framework for me first, and then my clients. And that one little piece is how to answer the insensitive remarks with grace. So I'm going to give you 5 key things that I teach clients inside my program. Steph, I'm so glad that you introduced today's topic, the no kids, do you want to borrow mine? Because I think that is a particular question that bothers most people without kids. And I've got some solutions for you. So I would love to know, how many of you, so we're not just going to talk about that particular question, but drop into the chat, how many of you have actually been on the receiving end of that remark? or question, I suppose. It's a question. Just type a yes. Okay, lots of yeses. Yeah, I had not received that one, or maybe I did and didn't notice in the earlier years before I really started to try to have kids. But I did actually get it recently. And I want to tell you a little bit about this story. I'm in a business, I don't know, mastermind. And we were in a breakout room with, I think there were 4 or 5 of us women, and we were just each introducing ourselves and what we do. And everyone comes from varied backgrounds and has varied businesses in this group. And so when I told the group what I do, one of the girls responded, "Oh, well, you can tell your clients that they can borrow my kids anytime." Ouch. So I kind of chuckled, and the rest of the group chuckled. And then we started talking about something else. And I spent the rest of the call kind of, or that particular breakout room, thinking about, oh, how would I respond to this? What could I have said? And I really started to delve into that. And I'm going to share what I actually did in the end. But I'm first going to tell you a little bit more about what I didn't do and what this webinar is not going to be. So you might be thinking that this is going to be a webinar that gives you the cheeky responses that you need to put people in their place for asking at least some scripts. And I'm not going to do that. My internet connection is unstable. Steph, can you just somebody give me a yes if I'm okay? I'm not frozen or anything.
Froze for a second, but you're fine again now. Don't worry.
Okay, good. Okay. So I'm not going to give you the cheeky responses. I'm not even going to give you a script. And I'm going to tell you why. First, I'll say, if you were expecting that, this might not be the webinar for you, but I'm going to encourage you to stay because I'm going to give you something better. So putting people in their place is kind of our first temptation. And that was kind of what was going through my mind at first when I got this particular question. And it happens sometimes when I get it still happens once in a while when I get other kinds of remarks. Why I don't respond sarcastically or with a script, it doesn't actually help them to understand what we go through as childless people. I want you to really think about that for a moment. Like, really think about it. What happens when you respond? I see this happening more on Instagram than in person. But what happens when you respond with something cheeky or you try to put people in their place? They get defensive, right? Even if they don't do it out loud, like they may apologize and it may seem sincere, but they're still going to walk away. Not everybody, but some people are going to walk away thinking, sheesh, I didn't know. I didn't mean to hurt this person. Or worse, they might feel ashamed, which, if you're familiar with the emotional, I forget what it's called, the hierarchy of emotions, shame is actually the lowest vibe emotion. It's lower than grief, even. So, and what happens when people feel shame? They get angry and they start blaming because their own brain, their ego, it's going to kick in and try to protect them from feeling that shame. So we as humans will do everything possible to not feel, to avoid feeling shame. And I wouldn't want anybody else, I don't want other people to feel grief. I don't want them to feel pain. So why would I want them to feel an even lower vibe emotion like shame? So what I want to teach you instead is to find a really authentic and kind answer within yourself. And that's going to be different for each one of you and for each scenario that you find yourself in and the person who's in that scenario with you. right? So I'm going to pause for a second and just check in on the chat. I like to see what's going on in the chat. How is this landing? Is this resonating so far? Are you guys still with me? Okay. Still here. Good. Okay, so I'm gonna actually, I'm a corporate girl at heart. I spent 20 years in the corporate world as an HR professional. So I cannot get rid of the slides. And so I'm just getting ready here to share. I love the direction you're taking. Okay, beautiful. All right. Let's get this going here. Okay, hopefully you're seeing one slide here. Steph, have I got this right? You're seeing my first key. Let me bring the chat up again also. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so the first one. The first key is to drop the myth that time heals all wounds. So who's heard this before? Time heals all wounds. Put time in the comments if you've heard that before. And maybe, yeah, okay. Most of us, right? And I think we're almost so conditioned, like I don't remember how many times I've heard that or when the first time was. I think it's right from, I don't know, from when we're kids. And society tells us, just keep yourself busy until it gets better. Time's going to make it better. And what that really, what's really happening when you wait for time to heal, it's like waiting for a leaky faucet to fix itself. You guys can't see this, but I actually have one in the back of my studio here, and it's leaking. And with a leaky faucet, you sort of try to ignore it at first, hoping that it'll just go away. And after a while, it does sort of fade into the background. You stop hearing it, but it's still there, causing damage to the bottom of your sink, running up your water bill. And it's probably actually, you know, that grief, those emotions, those things are sort of sitting underneath of the surface. So the first thing that I want you to do is to actually turn that around and let's not wait for time to heal. Let's take some action. So that actually leads me to my second slide here, my second key, which is to empower yourself. So our first temptation is to try to educate other people, try to get them to change and stop saying the insensitive things so that we don't have to put up with them anymore. And there's always somebody else who has not been educated. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. Do you guys know that game at the fair when you have this like a hammer with a pad and you just keep you have to keep trying to whack down the moles that pop up? There's always another one. So, and by trying to get other people to stop saying insensitive things, you're actually placing your power in their hands. You're leaving it to them to change. And most often they won't. So I want you to empower yourself. The other thing that I'm going to say about empowering yourself, and this is something that you might, this is in itself might be triggering for you. So the way that I like to think of triggers, we think that when other people say insensitive things, that they're hurting us. What they're actually doing is pressing on a wound that is already there. So that's actually good news, by the way. It means that you can actually heal the wound without trying to change other people, and you have so much more control over yourself. Why I say that it's like a wound, like a physical wound. So let's say you have a wound on your arm, like the picture, you put a bandage over it, You maybe put some clothes over top. You have a long sleeve shirt on, and you go out to meet a friend who then leans in for a hug, and she presses on that wound. Maybe it's on your shoulder. I don't know. She's not causing the wound. She's pressing on it. She's irritating it. And that's the way that I like to think of an emotional wound. We have a wound within us that we can actually heal. So that's the second key, is to actually empower yourself to look within you to see what's the wound that I need to heal. So we haven't yet got to the how to actually respond, but when you do these two things, these are sort of critical. These first two keys are critical before you can get to the place where you look at these insensitive remarks in a different way. So someone has a question here. Oh, read question 1. I said, I'd love to, because fear on sister-in-law's part, she starts reassuring her kids she'd never give them away. I'm not totally sure I understand that question. We'll come back to that. I'm going to leave a little bit of time at the end, and I'll kind of check in with the comments or the questions to see what else is coming up. Okay. Let's move on to key number 3. I'm going to do a little time check here. Okay, we're going to have lots of time for questions. So if you've got questions, drop them into the Q&A so that I don't lose them in the chat. Okay, key number 3. When you receive an insensitive question or remark, I want you to identify the emotion that you're feeling. So triggers, hot buttons, when someone hits a nerve, whatever you want to call that, it can lead to a bunch of different emotions. When someone says, for example, you can borrow my kids anytime, I would love to know what comes up for you. What can you identify the emotions or one of the emotions, maybe something besides grief, that comes up when someone says that? And if no one said that to you, think of another comment that you've received or that you've seen out there. Failure, anger, loneliness, anger. Yeah. Jealousy. Yep. Envy, jealousy. Shame. Yep. Not a feeling of not good enough. That's the worthiness coming through. So lots of other emotions that come up, and you guys are pretty good at actually identifying those. Brene Brown actually has, I think it's, if anybody's read Atlas of the Heart, such a great book for helping identify emotions. She actually says that there's 87 different emotions and experiences that we feel. And in her research, I think only people could answer on average like 4 or 5: anger, sadness, happiness. I forget what the other ones were. So this is the first step, really, is, what's the emotion that you are feeling, so that you can identify what that is, and that's when you can begin to release that. Now, I'm also wondering whether the emotions have changed for you as your journey has progressed through whatever point you came from, whatever your reason is for being here, and to where you are now. So some of you are probably just early on your journey, just realizing, okay, I'm not going to have kids. And some of you are maybe years into it. Have the emotions changed over the years? Have they improved? Or is it just different emotions that are coming up? Yeah, after about 20 years, the emotions are similar. Blunted, but probably not changed. Okay, so this is good. It's not good that you're feeling those things still, but this is going to help you change those emotions. Okay. Going back to key number 2, these emotions don't go away on their own. So we need to actually empower ourselves to take some action. So, and triggers can really be, they are, so some of you might not be ready for this, but when you get to the stage of healing that I'm at, you actually start to look at triggers as a gift because they help you to identify what is the wound. Where is this wound? Whenever someone hits a button for you, that's a clue that there's something for you to heal and something that you can heal that's in your power to. Okay, let's move on to key number 4. I call this the 3 C's. So this is kind of a 3-in-1 kind of a key. And some of you might have heard me talk about this on my podcast recently because I did one on the JD Vance thing. And I talked about all 3 of these things. I said earlier in the earlier on today that if you try to educate other people or try to get them to change, you're placing your power in their hands. So what we want to do instead is come at this remark or question or whatever it is with these 3 C's. So your first instinct might be to say, why would somebody say such a thing? And I actually want you to get curious. And you can ask the same question, but just say it in a different way with curiosity. Why would someone say this? Why would this person say this to me? Change the intention of that question from disbelief and rhetorical, because why would somebody say such a thing? That's sort of a rhetorical question, right? Change that to an energy of curiosity. Why would this person in front of me say this? What is going on in his or her or their life that would prompt them to say this? And when you ask the question in that way, it leads to compassion. So I'm going to ask you a question that might be tough for you to answer right now. How many of you feel as though you have empathy and compassion for the mothers in your life? And I want you to be honest with yourself here. I know it's not easy to have empathy for them sometimes. And I also know that it's not easy to be a mother in today's world. And I'm going to tell you, actually, I can give you an example right now. Sometimes when people say things like this, they are really actually going through something tough. So I had someone say to me recently, she started to say, she caught herself. She said, "You're so lucky," and then wanted to say, "You don't have kids." And that was after she had just finished telling me about her teenage daughter who had met a very manipulative young man who had gotten her into some pretty heavy and dangerous drugs. And their relationship was breaking down. And she was worried and scared and frustrated that she couldn't seem to do anything or say the right thing. And in that moment, I was in a place of maybe more healed or further along in my journey. I'd done a lot of work on myself already, and I was able to see, gosh, I can see why she said that. She really did see my life as one that she would like in this moment. That, of course, she loves her daughter, but in that moment, she wished she didn't have that problem. So I did seem lucky to her that I didn't have that problem. So once I was able to have compassion for what she was going through, then I could shift my own mindset about what she had been about to say. So when it comes to motherhood, let me scroll down in the comments here to what people are saying. Yeah, it depends on the scenario. Of course, I can have empathy. I'm also an aunt. Yeah. You do get a taste of it when you're an aunt. Honestly, my compassion is dependent on the person we're talking about. The ones I know that are having hard times, not the ones who make everything look perfect. Oh, I could do a whole, you know what? I could almost do a whole webinar just on the moms who make everything look perfect. Because sometimes I think they're the ones who are suffering the most. If you're anything like me, you've probably been thinking to yourself, the person who says you're so lucky you don't have kids, or you can borrow my kids anytime. You might be thinking to yourself, well, I'd take that any day over this. I'll take the good with the bad. And I used to think that as well. What we're doing when we think that way is creating a hierarchy of pain. What we're doing is, this pain that I'm in is worse than theirs. Theirs can't be as bad as mine. And what I have learned is that there is no hierarchy. People, they have no point of relativity until they've been through the thing that you've been through. So for them, they might be in the worst pain that they've felt, or they might not understand yours. So they actually, in most cases, they don't. So they might be thinking that their own pain is worse. And people, we all have our own scale of what feels painful. And so we can't compare from one person to another. I will also say, this wasn't something I was going to talk about today, but grief it can be cumulative. So if you have unprocessed grief from previous losses, whether that's a person, a job, a pet, a marriage, a partnership, whatever that is, if you have experienced loss in your past and you have not fully processed that, it can be the tiniest of straws that breaks the camel's back. So that pain is cumulative. That grief can be cumulative. So the person you're talking to might have, it might feel like the tiniest bit of pain when we look at it from the outside, but underneath of that, they've got all this other stuff that has accumulated. So that's what I wanted to say about that. So here's the other thing. We want to have compassion. We want to feel compassion. We want people to be compassionate towards us. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to actually turn that around and have compassion for them. That's actually what builds connection. And that is when they will actually try to understand what you're going through. So I'm going to tell you the end of my story with the lady in my business group who said to me, you can borrow my kids anytime, or your clients can borrow my kids anytime. I waited until the end of the breakout session, and I didn't know this girl. Actually, you know what? I'm going to wait to tell the end of this. I want you to see this next slide first. Key number 5 is to respond with kindness. And this can sometimes be really tough when you are in a moment of anger, of jealousy, of all those emotions that we talked about earlier. And it can feel like this is a lot of stuff to think about before actually responding. But when you begin to practice this, and when you start to sort of shift your mindset around, what can I do about this? Then this is going to happen in a matter of seconds. So it all sort of, I'm walking you through each step and taking the time to explain it, but this can all happen very quickly when you begin to practice it. So here's where you might have been expecting some actual responses. And again, I'm not going to give you that. This is about responding in a way that's authentic to you and the situation. So I feel like there's two kind of main categories of people who say things like this to you. There's, excuse me, the people that you want to invest in the relationship, and then there's people that you don't want to invest. And because sometimes it's just strangers and you don't care to invest in that relationship. And you're going to respond differently to that person than you would to the person who's your friend or your family member or someone, in my case, someone in my business group that I actually liked. I didn't know her very well, but I liked her and I didn't want to harbor resentment towards her. So my response was different than it would be for someone who was a stranger on the street or just someone who I didn't care to invest in. So I am going to give you a little bit of not the scripts, but the ways to respond. So if you don't want to invest in the relationship, let's talk about that first. So in these cases, I just sort of chuckle and walk away. And I think our instinct when they're strangers is to sort of smile or, paste something on our faces and walk away and then get angry. And if this is someone that you don't care to invest in, then you don't have to make what they said mean something about you. I'm going to say that again because this was one of the most critical questions that my own coach said to me. What are you making this mean about you? And it kind of blew my mind because quite often when somebody said something to me, I would make it mean that I'm a failure or that I'm not as good as they are or that they're better than me or that I don't fit with their crowd. And we can walk away and not make what that person thinks or says mean anything about us. So this is where your self-worth comes in. And this is another thing that I teach. It's a huge part of Steph says this all the time. You're worthy. And I find it easy to sort of intellectualize that. Yeah, I'm worthy. But underneath of that feeling of not being good enough, those feelings of not belonging, that's your worthiness. So, and trying to just tell yourself I am worthy is a little bit like telling yourself, we've all heard the affirmations. And I love affirmations, by the way, but it's like giving yourself an affirmation. I am rich when you don't have a penny to your name. Your subconscious is not going to believe that. So you have to get at the subconscious belief before you'll actually begin to believe that you are rich. So it's the same with worthiness. So we don't have to make it mean that we're less worthy. We don't have to make it mean that we're a failure. We don't have to make it mean that we don't belong. So again, easier said than done. This is something that I could do a whole series of webinars on how to change that mindset. But I want to just get you thinking about it for today. Now, if you want to invest in the relationship, you have some different options. So in my case, I actually did want to invest in the relationship with this woman in my business group. As I said, I liked her. I knew I was going to see her again, and I didn't want to harbor anger or resentment towards her. But I couldn't bring something up on that call. There was 5 of us there. It wasn't the appropriate place to talk about it. So something that you can do, if that's your situation, you're in a social situation where somebody says something, or you're at a gathering where it's, you can't just have some alone time to talk to the person, ask them to talk about it later. So I reached out to Rachel, was her name. I reached out to her and I asked her if she would be open to having a chat with me. And I didn't tell her what about right away, but she agreed. And when we got on the call, I said to her, I'm not sure how this is going to go over, but I really want to get your perspective and understand something that you said. And she was completely open to it. We talked about it. She made me realize a few things. She had 2 young children. One of them she was having a really hard time with. She had no sleep. There were a whole bunch of things that were going on in her life. And she said it as a moment of trying to actually connect with other people on the call. So we were in a new situation. Most of us hadn't really met each other. So she was looking for someone to understand her pain, and the other mothers in the group did. And when I could sort of lean into that a little bit and say, okay, I think I can understand where you're coming from. And then she asked me what was going on with me and what was it that bothered me about that comment, and tell me more about what's going on in the person who wanted kids. And it opened up this whole discussion about how we can heal and how we can bridge the gap between mothers and non-mothers, childless, child-free, whatever the case may be. And it really shifted my own mindset around how can I actually move forward when someone says things like this. So I would love to know how that resonated for you. Drop that into the chat, and I'm going to give you a couple of other examples or things to do and say. So the first is ask them to sit down and chat with you if this is someone that you want to invest in the relationship. And it can sometimes, I think Steph actually talked about a story like this as well. It can sometimes really surprise you what kind of open conversation you can generate with the person who originally triggered you or hit your hot button. The other thing that you can do, I'm just looking at my notes here. If you're in a place where you are on your own and you're with like one-on-one with this person, you can ask, like, what's going on in your life right now that's prompting you to say that? And this is a way of responding with kindness and compassion. It's have you ever heard I'm sure you've heard this, be the change you want to see in the world? I'm sure you've heard that quote before, be the change that you want to see in the world. If you want to receive compassion, give compassion. So when you are compassionate or try to fully understand where the other person is at, then they will also, usually, some won't, and those are maybe the people that you invest in no longer. But when you open up, you can sometimes be surprised by what by the compassion that they return to you. And then you actually also have an opportunity to do that education when they're in an open-hearted space. So, once you've kind of opened them up and gotten them out of that defensive mode, or never put them into it in the first place, then you might say, that really hit a nerve in me, what you just said. And I'm really struggling right now to accept that I'm not going to have kids. And so that's a way that it's creating an open-hearted space in which to have the conversation. I'm going to close with a couple of things here. So Steph was just telling me that the webinars that are, bringing in some of the spiritual, the meditations, those types of things are getting popular. So I'm gonna ask you to do something with me right now, because I think we've got some time. This is something that I say. I'm going to give you something that I say when I'm in the midst of a moment, when someone's hit my nerve. hit a hot button. How can I respond to this person with love and kindness? I trust that you'll provide me with the words. So it doesn't matter whether you say this to God as a prayer or to the universe or to your higher self, to maybe even your future self who is fully healed. And so I'm going to ask you to try this. So can you take a moment to maybe just recollect a moment when you have had something said to you that really kind of triggered you, that hit a hot button for you. And just call that memory up. And let's just take a moment to close our eyes. I'm going to close mine too. And take a deep breath in. Hopefully you're all doing this with me. So take a deep breath in. And just breathe that out. Take another couple of breaths in and out. And call your memory to your attention. And when you're in that moment, back there in that moment, just say the words. How can I respond to this person with love and kindness? I trust that you'll provide me with the words. How can I respond with love and kindness? Just sit with that for a few seconds and see how you feel, what changes, what words come to mind. You can open up your eyes when you're ready. And it's okay if you didn't feel anything, if nothing came to mind. We're not in the situation right now, so it will feel a little bit different than it will when we did have some tears. Okay. And I just felt a little bit of emotion come through myself. So some of you felt something. So what that question does, it shifts, it tells your brain to think about it in a different way. It tells your brain to come up with a solution that's loving and kind. So you will automatically, it's just saying the words, you don't even have to feel them right away. Just saying those words to yourself will cause a shift. So try that the next time you are in a situation where someone has said something that caused you anger, feeling of failure, the jealousy, whatever emotions come up for you. It gives me awareness of my need for love and connection. Yes. Yeah, I love that. We all need love and connection. And we tend to close our hearts. When someone says things, when we hear these remarks, it doesn't matter who they come from, we close our hearts and we lean out. And I think the gist of what I'm asking you to do is lean in. So let me quickly summarize and then we'll get to some questions. The 5 keys. First, let go of the myth that time heals all wounds and empower yourself instead. So we all have emotional wounds and we have the power to heal those. Whoop, jumped it back there. Identify the emotion that you're feeling, because that's going to help you to release it. If you can just put your finger on what exactly it is. And again, there's so many things that I could share with you that will help you release emotion, because we are taught to sort of bury emotion and distract ourselves from it, numb it as a society today. And it's the opposite of what we actually need to do. So identifying that emotion is going to help you to release it. The 3 C's, so curiosity, compassion, that's going to lead to the connection that you crave. And then how can you respond with kindness? And what happens when you learn how to do all 5 of these things? How would it feel, say, during holiday season, which is only like 8 weeks away at this point, if we think about American Thanksgiving? Sort of feels like the start of the holiday season in the States. I'm in Canada, so our Thanksgiving is in October, but end of November. You might feel a little bit different when that aunt comes up and gives you advice on how to go through adoption, or a stranger asks you if you have kids at a social gathering. So things can shift. And the last thing that I'll leave you with before we get to questions is just that you need to just take one step in order to get there. So, and this doesn't just apply, by the way, to this webinar. I would encourage you to do this throughout World Childless Week. Whatever panel you're listening to, whatever webinar you're watching, what's something that you can take action on? What's one little thing that resonated for you? And what could you actually try? What could you put in place the quickest? And that can happen. Like, you can see a shift today, tomorrow, next week. So I would challenge you to do that after this webinar. Just sit down and digest what you heard today. What are you going to take away from it? What are you going to leave for now? What can you do? So let me stop sharing. I'll come back to you, and let's have a look at the questions. I've had a Catholic tell me I'm immoral for having IVF. It was backed up by posters in the Catholic Church. I saw them as I attended a girlfriend's baby's christening. Any thoughts on this? I have so many thoughts on that. So I grew up religious. Let me start with that. And what I'm going to say about this is not a knock on, I didn't grow up Catholic, but I grew up Christian, Mennonite actually, which is also very, very very pronatalist. And so what I would say about this, so I'm not knocking any religion. Most religions I think out there are pronatalist. They encourage us to have children. The Catholic Church is a well-known one. And so assuming that comment, someone telling you that you're immoral for having IVF, let's go through the process. So this isn't something that's going to heal on its own. The next person who says that to you, you'll have the same reaction if you wait for time to heal. So the second one, empowering yourself. Let's assume that you have a wound within you and that can be healed. And when you heal that, the next person who says this to you or something similar, it's not going to hurt anymore. So you're going to empower yourself to look within and ask yourself, what is it that needs to be healed within me? And ask yourself, okay, so here's something we didn't really talk about. This is kind of getting into the more of the how. Do you actually believe that it's immoral to have IVF? Is there a part of you that believes that that's true? Because sometimes what we're doing when we feel this trigger is judging ourselves. And You can just drop the belief if you want. The other thing, I had another thought about that actually. If you truly believe that it's perfectly fine to have IVF, then what else? What's the emotion that you're feeling, and what else might be going on there? What's going on within you that is causing you to feel this way? And you also don't need to make what somebody else thinks, you don't need to make it mean anything about you. So that person thinks it's immoral for having for doing IVF. That person's just sharing what their beliefs are. That doesn't mean that you have to believe it. So whenever somebody talks, I actually think that's more about them than it is about you. They're just putting out on display what they believe. So this person believes that it's immoral to have IVF. You don't have to believe that, and you don't have to make that mean that you are immoral. So then the last thing is, and you're no longer in the situation, it might have been to sort of sit down with that. Well, and it depends on whether, again, you want to invest in that relationship or not. If you want to invest in that relationship, then it might mean you sit down and have a conversation about that. And if that person doesn't understand where you're coming from, then maybe that isn't somebody that you want to invest in, or maybe you walk away and keep those conversations at an arm's length going forward. The last thing is, how can you respond with love and kindness? So you're no longer in the situation, but I would encourage you to sort of maybe just do that exercise a few times. It might take a few times to ask, how can I respond within me with love and kindness? And bring the compassion towards that person who has just grown up in a church where she was conditioned to believe that doing IVF is immoral. So she's grown up in an environment where she actually believes, that is a sin, that's immoral. She might have people who have drilled that into her, or him, I don't know, whoever said the thing to you. So can you find compassion for that person and where they might be coming from? I hope that answered your question, or helped maybe reframe it a little bit. Can we talk about when there are people who we want an investment with, and they still think their lives are more important or harder because they have children? A lot of people have been posting this in the chat, and I experience this a lot. So it's so hard to sometimes it's hard to answer these without having a conversation about it. Because my first question is, what makes you believe that they think their lives are more important or harder because they have children? I have had someone respond to an Instagram post that I put up about how childless women are just as busy as the moms. So if I could use that as an example, how I worked through that, and I'm not going to go through all 5 steps since we only have a few minutes left. So I put up a post that talked about childless women, child-free women, doesn't matter if you have kids or not, we're all busy. And I had a mother really kind of come at me and try to defend her status as the busiest. And I think this would apply to important as well. And the way that I looked at that was, we live in a society where motherhood, especially the busy mom ideal, is glorified. And so most of the mothers who actually defend that title, they don't feel that way. So I don't know how this will resonate because it takes longer to explain this, but Mothers who try to make themselves important because they are mothers, they are falling into the same belief system that we've all grown up in, which is a very pronatalist society, which tells us also that motherhood is most important. Motherhood is what gives you purpose, all those things. And so mothers who are tying their worthiness to motherhood, they must defend that, because if we're all equal, then they're no longer, they might not be as worthy as we are if we shift that around, if we start playing with that. So many mothers out there are actually feel less worthy than we do. They feel like they're not good enough moms. They feel like we're all supposed to be super moms in this world. And when people don't measure up to that, they don't feel like they measure up. So they defend that title because they think that's what makes them worthy. I hope that made sense. It's something that I could talk forever on, because it's there's so much there. Steph, do we need to stop right at noon, or can I go ahead and answer some more of these questions?
Keep going, another 10 minutes is no problem.
Okay. Okay, great. I'm compassionate of others more than for myself. How do I make that space to improve my worthiness and look after me and my needs first for self-compassion after a compounded grief from 20s to 40s? So, well, that's a really big question. I look at worthiness as a muscle. So, in the same way that you will lift, you don't start lifting the 25-pound weights, you start with the 5-pounders. You begin to practice worthiness. And when you don't, those muscles atrophy. So you can go up and down in worthiness through your life. I think we're all born with feeling worthy. And then through the years, people teach us things. We're programmed, we're conditioned. People say things that our worthiness goes down. So there's, I guess, to give you a quick tip, I would say practice small things that make you feel worthy, that you desire for yourself. So identify a need, a small need. I really need a cup of coffee. And rather than putting that off, can you go and make yourself a really good cup of coffee and then enjoy it? Another example I'm trying to think about. Even just like, I need to rest. So can you, if you're really feeling like you need to rest, can you take a 10-minute nap? Can you go to bed half an hour earlier and honor one small thing that you need, that your body needs, your emotional health, whatever that is? Pick a small thing and do that. And then practice small things. That it's about identifying what you truly need and desire and doing those things. So start with it. Don't do the big thing that takes you a full day. Do one small thing. Yeah, rest is a big one. I'm looking at the chat now too. Okay, I hope that helped. I have often displayed curiosity and compassion with no reciprocity and end up feeling more hurt. Oh, that's such a good question, Sandy. I'm just kind of allowing that to sink in, because I'm sure that happens to all of you, or has happened before. And so the first thing that comes to mind is kind of, again, when someone doesn't, there's two things that I'm thinking about. when someone doesn't have compassion for you, then I would ask yourself if that is really a relationship that you want to invest more time into. Because if someone can't return that compassion, that's what connection is. And you're going to have a hard time connecting with that person in any scenario. So either that stays a surface friendship, or it remains a stranger, or I'd encourage you to think about whether that is someone that you want to continue investing time in, because you'll lack that connection if that person doesn't have the ability to empathize with you. The second thing I would say is that this is something that I have a whole section on it in my program. It's we tend to, I did this too. So this is not a judgment, and I don't want any of you walking away feeling judged or judging yourselves. We tend to go into, it doesn't really matter, grief for any reason, and we expect support from other people. And we sort of have a right to expect that from our friends and family. And yet we're also, as a society, not taught how to validate other people's pain. We're taught to fix it, or we're taught to find the silver lining, or we're not actually taught how to validate and sit with someone in their pain. So I actually think there's very few people who can do that. So what I teach is finding that support from within you. And that might be from, I like to think of it as my angels who provide me with support. And I teach kind of how to do this, but you can ask for the universe, for God, for your angels, your guides, your higher self, your future self, to comfort you. Get into a meditation and imagine that they're embracing you, and find that comfort, that compassion that you crave within you. And then I had one more thought about this, and I can't remember what it was. If I think about it, then I will come back to you. I'll come back to that question. I'm actually going to stop. I want to say your names, but I'm not going to, just to maintain your own anonymity. How do you use your steps of compassion for someone who says, well, my kids will take care of me when I'm old? Who will take care of you? This is such a common one. So one of my clients actually said something that blew my mind, because I hadn't even thought of this before. I'm going to give you one tip. What the person says, so you can, I mean, we all know that quite often the children of people are not taking care of their parents. What I see within my aging parents is that friends take care of friends. Their friends take care of each other. They're all doing things together, and they're going and visiting when one of them is sick. It's not so much the children. Okay, that said, so there's no guarantee that your children are going to take care of you when you're older. There's the cheeky response. What my client said was, can you, as a way to, okay, hang on a second. Let me step back a second. What to say to that person is different from how I view this scenario. So what to say to the person is, I'm in this position right now, and it's opening up that conversation again. What am I going to do about that at this point? Like, if I don't have children, what are your suggestions? Let's have a conversation about this. How could we, this is a key question. How could we make sure that we are taken care of when we grow older? So that may actually open up a conversation with that person. But I would also encourage you to do this for yourself. My client said, what if we stop worrying about, 20 years down the line when we feel old, and we lean into the relationships that we have now. So it feels a lot scarier when we think about when we're 80, but we really only have tomorrow. We might not even have tomorrow. So can we lean into the relationships that we have now so that we have people around us in 2 years, in 5 years, in 20 years? So I'm going to leave that to you to ponder. And I'll do one more. We've got 2 minutes. Oh, okay. That was just a thank you. And you're welcome. I struggled with a friend who basically said I was living her worst fear, and it made me feel really bad. How do I apply your method to that? So I'm thinking about this. So I guess, let me think about this. Time heals all wounds. No, it doesn't. Empower yourself. So what's the wound that you might have been feeling as a result of that? So she says you're living her worst fear. What's the emotion that comes up? So when you say it made me feel really bad, what does bad mean to you? And then once you identify that, that will help you to release that. Then there's curiosity. So leaning into, what would prompt you to say that? So really trying to understand what would prompt you to say that, and what do you think I'm feeling? Opening up a dialogue with her around, you are feeling like this, or maybe you aren't. Maybe you're starting to feel pretty good. And she or he says something like that. What are you making it mean about you? And I encourage you to, after this call, kind of maybe sit down and say, how can I respond with kindness to this question? How can I respond with love? What are the words that I could say? Okay. I think we need, Awakening Worth is the name of my podcast. Steph, I think we're out of time. We're at 12:10, and I apologize that I didn't finish getting to the questions down here. But I really want to thank you all for listening. This has been a really great conversation. I really wish I could go through the chat and see all of the different responses. I couldn't keep up. So I thank you for engaging. Thank you for taking this time for you. And hopefully I'll see you again sometime and meet you face to face.